If we're right that the economy is going to have a harder landing than most economists and strategists expect, what will this administration do to counteract the bad news during an election year? Powell's use of the word restrictive and saying that the real interest rate was well above the neutral rate, and that defines restrictive. So half of the solution is understanding the problem. If the economy weakens as much as we think it's going to, the Fed is now getting into the mindset with the use of that word, and we might see a pivot faster than might ordinarily be the case. After all, M2 is down roughly 4%. It has been down on a year-over-year basis for 8 months. What do we have to look forward to? Well, now the topic is potential government shutdown if there's no agreement on the budget. And just like with the debt ceiling, this is going to work out. We're moving into an election year, and no one wants to be seen as disrupting the government and bringing that kind of attention during an election year. So there'll be a lot of saber rattling, but we'll probably land at something in and around September 30th. And then this week we got some clarification. The IRA, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which we do not believe that's the reason inflation is going down, but nonetheless, one of the things we are focused on, though, in terms of fiscal policy is if we're right that the economy is going to have a harder landing than most economists and strategists expect, what will this administration do to counteract the bad news during an election year? And I think the bond market is already a bit on the warpath when it comes to fiscal spending. The words out of control seem to be bandied about constantly in the press, and I can't imagine there's going to be another layer of spending, but it is a risk. It is a risk, and I think the bond market will not take too kindly to it. The yield curve is still inverted, roughly 70 basis points, and that's a harbinger of slower than expected or lower than expected inflation, or both, and we think both will be the answer there. And the yield curve has been inverted for a year now. Now, many people are probably sick and tired of this talk about any landing. You know, they're hearing soft landing, hard landing, and most are thinking it's soft landing now. We are thinking harder landing, but how hard? It's certainly not going to be anything like 08-09. Why? Because we've been in a rolling recession for about a year. As you'll recall, in the first half of 2022, GDP was negative for 2 consecutive quarters. Technically, that's the definition of a recession, but we don't know when the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research, is how they're going to characterize this. We won't know for 1 to 3 years, I think, after the fact. So, but we know that that housing is back down to COVID lows. And we know that autos are still in a very soft spot in the 15 to 16 million unit range. 17.5 has been normal, 13 in a recession. So it could go down a little bit more. Inventories, we're hearing in this earnings season, big declines in inventories, especially at retail. In some cases, double-digit inventory declines, so 15%. So that's going to hit in the third quarter. Most retailers report through July. So that's interesting. Now, those are some of the most cyclical indicators or cyclical sectors when it comes to economic activity. Capital spending is starting to weaken now as well. But if we have the most cyclical sectors already having experienced some kind of recessionary condition, this landing is not going to be deep. What is it going to depend on? It's really going to depend on the consumer. And in turn, that will probably depend on the unemployment rate. And we'll get to that in a moment. We did get the employment report today. But if the unemployment rate goes up, then consumer spending, we think, given the very low saving rate, 3.5% now, was before COVID around 8%. So it's down down to 3.5% now. And the end of the moratorium for student loan payments, which is in September. That could be a double whammy. So consumption is what's going to determine the kind of recession we're in. And I do believe the consumer is on strike also against price increases. We saw and heard a number of companies in earnings season saying, yep, we probably went too far. Even Domino's said it. We probably went too far. We need to readjust pricing. So many people do not believe we will see deflation in the CPI. I believe that's the reason inflation's going down. But nonetheless, we knew that that this administration was going to target drug prices. And we got the 10 drugs. They're associated with large pharma companies. And it was interesting that the stocks actually went up because most of these drugs, if not all of them, are scheduled to go off patent in the not too distant future. And so their prices were going to come down anyway. So while the administration said that the price declines would be somewhere between 20 and 60% for these drugs, and a lot of them are for the highest spending categories that Medicare is trying to control, heart disease especially, most of the prices when they go generic will drop by 80%. That's what usually happens. Now, there will be more drug price cuts, but they're not going to happen until well after the election. So we don't have to worry about it right now. And if the administration were to change, there may be new legislation countering this legislation.